Okay, good morning, Dad. Today is Wednesday, November 6th. And anything you want to say about the election?
Well, I hear that Trump won,
Yep.
which is no surprise. I expected that he would win. I didn't vote. I was thinking about going over to the polling station, which is very close to here, and writing in Masoud Pezeshkian or maybe Alexander Lukashenko or something like that. But
That's
I
the
didn't.
quickest way to get on a CIA watch
Yeah,
list,
I
probably.
never, but I never got around to it. I didn't vote for president for the reasons I stated. It's just that the evil, the enormity of the evil in Palestine is so great that I can't support either candidate. And I do respect people who, you know, vote on the basis of the lesser of two evils. I know that makes sense, but I just couldn't do it. Looking at foreign policy, I'd have to say that I believe overall Trump is the lesser of two evils. He's not a neocon. He's not an ideologue. He's a pragmatist. He's not really enamored of war. Unlike the Democrats. I mean, Harris, she doesn't have any foreign policy or thoughts in her head. She's really, it's not something that she's concerned about. But that means that you're going to get the same kind of people. You're going to get the same neocons in charge. They're going to prosecute all the wars that they were prosecuting under Biden. With Trump, yeah, clearly he's shown impatience about Ukraine. I don't, and there's a chance that he might actually do something about it. I have to say, but it's just a chance. A lot of people are certain that he will. I don't think it's at all certain. Looking at the problem is that even if he wants to do something about it, he's up against a very formidable opposition. Even past presidents have discovered this too. How difficult it is to make the blob, the foreign policy deep state actually do anything. They do what you want it to do. It's very, very difficult. And Trump is he's a kind of an impatient, incoherent, inconsistent kind of personality. And he's up against a very formidable, highly organized opposition. So I would think the smart money, if he's going to try to change things, a policy on Ukraine, the smart money would actually be on the deep state. I think it's very unlikely that he would succeed. But there's always a possibility. And, the fact, I think the most that we really can hope for is that there might be a real diminution or maybe complete cutoff of funds to Ukraine because of, that's, I think, clearly a popular move. This is, the American people are not interested in sending any more money to Ukraine. And
Would,
we might
would
see
that
that under.
essentially would that essentially end the conflict? I
Well,
mean,
it would,
we
yeah.
talk about
I'm read it wouldn't. Okay, it would lead to a faster Russian victory. Unfortunately, the best thing, the ideal outcome would be for the U.S. and Russia to negotiate, and the U.S. to finally, say recognize Russia's security interests, maintain neutrality in Ukraine. That is, okay, openly declare that Ukraine will not become a NATO member, but that's not going to happen. So what we're going to get, if the funds are cut off, it's clearly a good thing. It would mean a faster Russian victory, fewer Ukrainian lives lost, but we would end up with some kind of frozen conflict. The Russians would at least take the four oblasts plus Crimea.
well,
And,
well, the Russians are in the driver's seat. I mean, they don't want a frozen conflict, right? So, I
well,
mean, what would
okay,
stop them from?
if they achieve what they want to achieve, or feel like realistically they can achieve, then they may just choose to stop. Now, what Putin has said is that they're going to at least take those four oblasts. But if there's no security agreement, he may feel the need to go on and take Kharkov and Odessa and Nikolaev, just to create a larger buffer zone and keep a potential like NATO base from being built on the Black Sea.
Right. I mean, that was the whole idea. I mean, this conflict was not to have NATO right up against Russia's
Right.
border,
So
the
if yeah,
Ukrainian border. So if he freezes it here, he has the same issue.
yeah, I
You
think
know,
I think
it's
you're right. You're right. If he can't get that, the assurances from NATO, and I think he's not, clearly not. Even under Trump, that's not going to happen. I think they're going to be pretty much forced to go to Odessa. I mean, for their own security.
Okay, well, I guess we'll just watch and see. And do you feel like a Trump presidency will have basically no impact on the Middle East, the Israel-Palestine
I think probably
conflict?
not. He's all along he's been a really fervid supporter of Netanyahu, but so has Biden. Sometimes he pretends he isn't, but clearly he has. So it's hard to imagine how he could be more of a supporter. I don't think there's going to be any change. I think again, it's just because he's Trump and he's a wild card, and he's been described as a chaos agent. He might just do something, completely unexpected, and I think there actually is some, a small chance, but a real chance that he could, put actual pressure on Netanyahu and bring about some kind of peace. I think the chance actually is greater under Trump, even though he's supposedly more Zionist than the Democrats are. I think they're equally Zionist, to be honest. It's just because of his personality, his unpredictability. There's a chance that he might actually go off the script and do something right. Occasionally he says something that shows that he kind of understands that what's going on is really bad. I think it's a small chance, but it exists. It wouldn't have existed at all under Harris. Even though she's a Democrat and it's a Democratic base that's unhappy about it, she's so firmly ensconced in the establishment that I don't think there was ever any chance that she was going to change course in the Middle East.
Right. Yeah, just, I've been amazed over the past year just watching the U.S. harm itself over this Israel-Palestine conflict, just how subservient we are to the interest of Israel and not to the interest of the United States. I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I don't know if Trump strikes me as the person that would take that subservience to Israel the same way as just to bow down and just say, okay, we tell you not to do something, and then Israel just goes ahead and do it, and then we say, oh, well, it's complicated. Israel will give them more and more and do more. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading completely wrong, but I am slightly cautiously optimistic that, that there's something in Trump and the Trump administration that has a little bit of self-interest for the United States and not letting it contribute to the self-interest
I agree.
stuff.
I mean, I could see, for example, like he does give Netanyahu some firm warning, thinks he has a real understanding about something. Netanyahu just blows him off like he always does, right? But his reaction won't be like Biden. Biden will fume, secretly in the White House, but then won't do anything. He'll just he'll go out, onto the White House lawn and grovel in front of the microphones and tell everybody how wonderful Israel is. But there's a chance, I think that maybe there's a little bit more self-respect in Trump, that if that he got double-crossed by Netanyahu, he might get really angry and then go out and tell everybody and then say, forget him, he's not getting another bullet or something, just because he's, politics are very personal.
I can see an all-caps tweet going out.
Right.
No.
Again, I wouldn't put a whole lot of, hope in that, but it's possible. Like I say, I think it's more possible that some positive development might occur under Trump than would have been possible under Harris.
Yeah, I mean, the bar is just so low now that it's just hard to imagine foreign policy getting much worse. It's a really sad state of sad state of affairs.
These last 4 years have probably just been absolutely dismal on the foreign policy front. So, like you say, I just don't think it can get worse. And let's just hope for some sort of small improvement somewhere.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, we don't have to talk about it much.
Okay.
I know it was a very contentious, a very polarizing election. So if anybody's stressed out about the results, well, my dad says that the elections usually don't matter. The deep state marches on, so it doesn't. So don't.
Right. Especially when it comes to foreign policy. Right. I don't expect any significant changes, of course, but there is a chance. It's not a completely insignificant chance. There is a real chance that it might be. And let's just hope there is.
Okay. Well, I'll temper expectations. Well, something actually I was thinking that we could talk about today is China.
Okay.
I know we haven't really talked about China much at all, but I was just listening to John Mearsheimer again, and I know you have a lot of respect for John Mearsheimer. I do as well. But the one thing that I don't really agree with him, I don't understand where he's coming from so much, is his position on China. This idea that we have to contain China.
Right.
He has this, I guess, offensive realism is what he calls it, or this idea of regional hegemons that they will a regional hegemon cannot allow another regional hegemon to exist because they'll begin to expand and they'll ultimately come into conflict. And he talks about this, that there are really three great superpowers in the world. There's the U.S., Russia, and China. And really the two big ones are the U.S. and China. Russia's the third. And in this balance of power politics, it was crucial for us to make sure that Russia was on our side in order to contain China. And because that is the inevitable way of the world, is that great powers are power seeking and they need to expand. And the only way for their own security is to make sure that there is no other great power to rival them. And that's the unfortunate state of affairs. We're in this iron cage on planet Earth, and that's the game. There has to be some dominant power, and if another one starts to come up, then it's the dominant power needs to contain and suppress the upcoming power to prevent basically what we've done to the world have China do to the world and to us. So first of all, do you have any credence to that theory? John Mearsheimer is a very smart guy, obviously. Right. What's your position on that?
Well, I am a great admirer of John Mearsheimer. I think he's one of the great intellects of our time, and I go to him for wisdom all the time. I mean, I think he's profoundly wise about all kinds of conflicts. Now, I agree. That I make an exception for China. I guess I have to say, in fairness, that I don't fully grasp his argument, and so I don't want to really characterize it. But I think you gave a more or less accurate rough sketch of it. So I won't add anything to it. Now, I'm sure there are nuances to it. Knowing John Mearsheimer, he's no fool. He understands the area very well. And when I hear him talk, he believes firmly that, well, first of all, that we should avoid war. He's not a warmonger on China, and that we can. So he feels like he has some kind of policy that can keep China in check while avoiding war. That's, and I don't know exactly how he can pull that off. But we'll just leave it there. I don't see how you can keep China down. I mean, that China has become so powerful, and it quite naturally is going to try to establish a sphere of influence, just as the U.S. did in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's kind of to insist that they can't have their sphere of influence, their Monroe Doctrine, and while we can maintain ours, I think is just not sustainable. It was sustainable when China was fundamentally weaker, but it no longer is. I think it's clearly, the stronger party now. It's especially in the Far East, where it's got, it has thousands or tens of thousands of missiles and hundreds of thousands of drones and a very large Navy now that can more than match what the U.S. can bring to bear there. And I've heard that, like, even when the U.S. war games conflicts there between China and the U.S. in the South China Sea, China always wins. And I think they're also, again, they always assume that the conflict's not going to go longer than a month. I think we talked about this earlier, but as we could see in Ukraine, there's always a chance that it could turn into a real war of attrition. And the U.S. is even less prepared for something like that. Everything, the U.S. military doctrine just assumes a fast war. And that's, we have the weapon systems for it. We have, but we don't have the industrial capacity or the stockpiles for a war of attrition. That's already become very clear. Um, so, so China is the stronger party, and you're trying to keep them down. It just seems like that's a formula for disaster. I think you should simply admit, okay, that that this age where we could keep China in check, we could hold them back, and we could be the regional hegemon in their own backyard. That those days are over, and we just need to accept reality. And I don't see how that has any negative consequences for the U.S. I think it's quite the reverse. If we pull out gracefully, we avoid conflict. I think it would be a humiliating conflict for us. And I don't see Chinese naval ships off the coast of California or anything like that. One thing is that China has shown itself to be really not at all interested in replacing the U.S. as a global hegemon. They want to be they are the regional superpower, and and in their own security interests, they want to maintain influence, a sphere of influence around their borders. I think that's quite natural. But I don't think they've shown any kind of inclination. They don't have the same kind of ideological zeal that you find in the West now, which is globalist. They're not globalists. They're not hegemonic thinkers. And so I don't see why it's a problem. I really don't. Again, there might be something in John Mearsheimer's thinking that I just don't know about. I'm sure there is. Again, because I have so much respect for the guy. I may be mischaracterizing his thoughts, but I all I can do is present my understanding of his argument, and I think it's wrong when it comes to China. Now, it's interesting. Again, he has no hostility towards China. He's not like a lot of these, American politicians and pundits who clearly, just hate China, just like others hate Russia. And you say, what's wrong with you? He has none of that. In fact, he often goes to China, and he really loves China. And he's kind of a celebrity there when he goes to the universities. All the students want to have his signature or take selfies with him. He's adored there. Even though they know that that he has this position vis-a-vis China, but they respect him. They know that he's an honest man. He's he's a good man. He has no hostility. He's just realistic. He's pursuing the interests of his own country in the way that he understands it, and that's something they respect. Which again just shows the real difference between a realist and a pragmatist, on the one hand, and these zealous ideologues that we have, unfortunately, running the show. Again, right. Everybody, like even the enemy, can understand. Okay, you think this is your interest. We disagree with you. We're on the other side. We're your adversary, but we respect you and we can talk to you. But you can't talk to an ideologue, and that's those are the people who lead the West now.
Yeah, how do you think John Mearsheimer developed this position, this theory? Because, like you said, to me, it just doesn't make sense. I don't see it. I see the much greater threat is in our effort to contain China is how we start a war.
Right.
And then that's the real fear.
Yeah, he believes that we can avoid that, but I'm not so sure. One thing is, he may not, he admits he doesn't really know Chinese history very well. And if you know Chinese history, you know about the century of humiliation. It was a time when the foreign powers divided up China. China was very weak. And then various Chinese warlords and made deals with the foreign imperialists. And those people are hated. I've seen many historical Chinese films and also period dramas that are set in the early 20th century, and the message that comes through again and again, it was that China was humiliated, and those Chinese who collaborated with those imperialists are evil and must be defeated. And when the Chinese look at Taiwan, they see the same thing all over again. They see these Taiwanese collaborating with an imperialist power, that's the U.S., attempting to it's the last vestige of that century of humiliation. And I think that there's just no question that China's going to take back Taiwan. And it'll be immensely popular when it's done. It'll say this finally ended. That was the last, again, vestige of the century of humiliation, and we stamped it out. It would be a great victory for Xi Jinping. Again, Xi Jinping's a very smart and cautious person, and he's not going to go in recklessly. But I think there's a chance that he will. I mean, I think there's a very powerful motivation that maybe John Mearsheimer doesn't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would make sense perhaps for China and Xi Jinping to make a move on Taiwan in the not too distant future, just because the U.S. has been greatly weakened through its conflicts in Ukraine as well as the Middle East. But I guess if I was China, we're continually being weakened. So maybe let it play out a little bit longer, just see what happens. Like we said, the U.S. empire is collapsing. Right, it's declining. So I don't see there as much of a rush for them to get that done. But I agree that it's the inevitable force. China's right there, Taiwan's right there, and also just the Taiwanese themselves. It's pretty mixed on reunification, isn't it? It's not so much, the way that the West views it is that all of Taiwan is wanting independence from the evil yoke of China. Right. Is that an accurate description at all, or
no? Well, of course, your own mother, who was born and raised in Taiwan, and her sisters, they're all in favor of China coming to liberate Taiwan because they consider themselves to be Chinese, and clearly they are. In Taiwan, you find something very similar to what has occurred in Ukraine. The Ukrainians try to pretend that they have nothing to do with the Russians. Of course, a large percentage of them are, in fact, ethnic Russians, and an even larger percentage are Russian-speaking. And then those that aren't, who are, have a firm Ukrainian identity, well, that Ukrainian is basically a dialect of Russian. I mean, Kiev, Lvov, Lviv, this is not a different language. They're obviously very closely tied to the Russians. And you find the same thing in Taiwan, but among the Taiwanese nationalists, just like the Ukrainian nationalists, is this fiction that we have nothing to do with China. We're just a completely separate people. Now, of course you do. That all scattered through Taiwan, you see these temples, and they have Chinese sages and saints in the temple, statues of them, and they're Chinese characters on the columns. And what are the holidays that they celebrate? They're all traditional Chinese holidays. They're Chinese, but there's this effort to deny it, just like the Ukrainians are trying to pretend they have nothing to do with Russia. But those, many Chinese, especially the older generation, are very upset at this. Like, again, your mother and your aunts. And they say, I have enough of this, just let China come. Let's be part of China. That's our country. I would say they're definitely in a minority, but it's a significant minority. And then also, I would say on the nationalist side, okay, you would find, especially, among younger people, a lot of say, we don't want to have anything to do with China or whatever. Again, they've become obsessed, many of them obsessed with the West, like the Ukrainians have. But if it came to a fight, I think I don't think you're going to find many Taiwanese that are willing to risk their lives to defend their country. I may be wrong, but that's just the sense that I've had from living there and then, visiting in subsequent years.
Right. It just seems right. It's funny that this is even really a debate. I mean, you just look at China, a population of 1.4 billion people, the manufacturing powerhouse of the whole planet. Next to right off the coast of it is Taiwan, where there is actually a sizable minority that identifies as Chinese and wants to have reunification already. So that's already an issue. But even if all of them were completely nationalists, want independence, you look at it. I mean, it's the same thing with Ukraine, but now the difference between Taiwan and China, now we have it times 10. In terms of the ability for Taiwan to actually even claim independence. I mean, it's just ludicrous to think that it's possible that somehow, don't worry, Taiwan, throw off the Chinese yoke, declare independence, and we got your back. Anybody realistically looking at it's like, no, that's suicide. That's how you destroy Taiwan. And Taiwan is a small island, population of less than 30 million people, population of Shanghai, one city in China. is the whole population of Taiwan. So it's silly that we have this that we're kind of fostering that environment there to try to this independence movement. It's just so destructive for everybody. It's just not
Right.
good for the Taiwanese. Clearly,
Well, yeah, the
but
independence movement, like the in Taiwan, like the the nationalist movement in Ukraine, it's indigenous. It has indigenous roots, but it's become so powerful because they can rely on the U.S. for support, just like in Ukraine. If the U.S. had made clear early on, okay, no, we're not getting involved in this. We're not going to support you. It's you're going to have to make your own deals with your larger neighbor. I think that like the whole nationalist movement never would have gone anywhere because people will look at them and say that you're not going to take on Russia. This is stupid. Let's just make peace and live with them and coexist with them. And the same thing in Taiwan. But because this one faction can claim the U.S. as its ally, it becomes greatly empowered, and its words seem to have some sort of reality. It's like, and that's all quite unfortunate because if war really does break out, if the U.S. does become involved, it's going to be to the humiliation of the U.S. And then there's a chance that the U.S. might just turn tail and run, say, we don't want to do this. In any case, it'll lead to the destruction, or at least partial destruction, of Taiwan.
right. I mean, I imagine the nationalist movement in Taiwan has to be losing some steam just if they're watching what's happening in Ukraine, right?
You would think
it's kind
so.
of like what
Right. You would think
it's like
so.
what you said in Georgia. The Georgia Dream Party was holding up, pictures of destroyed Ukrainian cities and said, "You want Georgia to become like this?" Essentially, that's the same thing with Taiwan, right? I mean, if you're a Taiwanese nationalist, you're watching like we got the U.S. behind our back. Well, that's what Ukraine thought, and that's what they said, and we're watching what's happening right now in real time. We're seeing their whole country destroyed, a whole generation of men essentially either fled or killed. It's horrific.
Right.
But you said it's not actually losing steam, the nationalist movement, despite what we're all witnessing happen to Ukraine.
I can't answer that question directly. I don't know if it's gaining a momentum or losing. It's the current leader, the current president of Taiwan is probably the most nationalist that Taiwan has ever had. And he's come very, very close to declaring independence for Taiwan. And again, the PRC has made it clear again and again that if Taiwan ever does declare independence, China will attack, will take Taiwan back by force. So he's come right up against that line. Now, he in the recent elections, he did not even receive a majority of the votes. He received a plurality, and the reason that he got elected was that there was a third-party candidate that drew away a lot of votes that otherwise, probably most of which would have gone to the Kuomintang, the nationalist, more conservative party that wants to maintain friendlier relations with China. So it's not a majority that supports him, but he's there, and he's a real hothead. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I brought up, Mearsheimer in China is just that this new administration that's in place, and also the deep state as well, the current deep state, does seem to follow that policy of containing China. That seems to be something that we've been implementing. Trump put, started the trade war to try to contain China. Biden continued it and added more stuff to it. And then when I hear sometimes the politicians talk, including the ones that will be in the new administration coming in, people like Vivek or J.D. Vance, very smart people that, a lot of times I'll think like they're saying some smart things that I like, but often when it comes to that, something that seems like everybody agrees on is that China is bad, and that's the real threat to America.
Right.
And we need to focus our attention. And this idea that even talk about, we need to end the war in Ukraine and restore relations with Russia again, because we need to bring Russia back onto our side to drive a wedge between them and China, because China's the real threat. It's that balance of power theory that John Mearsheimer has, that we
Right.
have these three superpowers and we need to have Russia on our side to maintain that balance in order to contain China.
Well, that makes sense as far as it goes, but I think it's already too late. There's no way that you're going to convince Russia to come back at this point. It's just like, we didn't mean it. It's been too many years of unrelenting hostility, and real attempts to inflict harm and actually to bring about, disintegration and fall of the government. Say that no, you're our enemy. We don't care what you say anymore. We don't believe anything. So that's, that ship has already sailed. It certainly would have been a wise policy from a geopolitical point of view, but it's something that should have been pursued starting at least 10 years ago. And now it's just too late. Just over the last 10, 15 years, relations between China and Russia have become increasingly tight. And, and whereas relations between the U.S. or the West in general and both China and Russia have, moved in the opposite direction. And there's just no chance of realignment now. But in theory, they're right about that. It's just not practical.
Right. It just seems like there's this obsession in the United States to have an enemy. It's like we can talk about one thing like, maybe this new administration would be better with Ukraine and Russia, and we can maybe see an end of bloodshed. But the reason is because we have to focus on China. It's like, whoa, that's not what I wanted.
Right, exactly.
How about we?
No. It's so strange. Well, I think this is also the difference. I was saying that China, it's really the West and the U.S.-led West that has this obsession with enemies. Because I think again, it's a symptom of a globalist hegemonic way of thinking. You just can't admit any kind of adversary anywhere on the globe. Now, in the multipolar way of thinking, you say you can. Okay, the Americans are doing something very different. We don't like it, but they're way over there in the Western Hemisphere. So just let them do what they do, right? But for some reason, we can't think that way. Other countries like China can, but we can't. I think it is ridiculous. There's just no reason. You don't have to like China. I understand why a lot of people don't like the Chinese government or the Chinese way. Fine. You don't have to go there. And if you don't want to buy their goods, don't buy their goods. That's a little difficult these days, but you could try that. But the need to go out and punish them somehow is just, I think it's a kind of sickness, but it's there. I saw a political ad put out by Marsha Blackburn, the senator from our great state of Tennessee. It was an anti-China ad, and the thing was so moronic. A friend of mine at church, and we're talking about it and just say, what an embarrassment. It was just, she was throwing, there was this silly pun, a visual pun, that she was throwing China on the ground, smashing it up. And anyway, I don't need to talk about it, but it's just say, Marsha, you're the senator from Tennessee. It's like what China is doing should be down number 253 on your list of important things to do for Tennessee. What are you doing this for? It shouldn't even
break the top 1,000. It shouldn't even be on the list. That's the thing.
Right.
Yeah, well, I guess that's just my fear is just, that...
Right.
That the deep state clearly wants conflict, and it does have this offensive realism theory that John Mearsheimer puts out, that it needs to contain any other power. And obviously that would seem to be, I think, our goal with Russia. And the thing is, I think so many people were still living in the Soviet Union past, and that was our goal. We have to contain the Soviet Union. That the momentum just kind of pushed it forward, even though we didn't necessarily need to do it anymore because the Soviet Union exists and we could have had friendly relations with Russia. But there's this drive to still that's moving forward with Asia and China as this threat. And I don't think that the new administration will put any brakes on the deep state to continue that containment policy. I mean, we saw it actually expand under Trump. So I guess I have that fear that will we
it is okay, well, right. It is a real fear. Your fear is justified. It's something to worry about. Again, with Trump, it's hard to say because he could just make a deal with Xi Jinping, and he has expressed annoyance at Taiwan, but you just never know. He's not a consistent thinker, and again, he's up against a deep state that is very hostile to China. I remember when the Biden administration came in, a lot of people assumed that our relations with China would improve significantly, especially a lot of conservatives. I always thought it was silly at the time, but they said, it was sort of like China was to the conservatives as Russia was to the liberals. They assumed that there was some sort of collusion between the Chinese government and the Democrats, and the Chinese money was supporting the Democrats and whatever. None of that was true. And, again, Biden has been just as hostile, if not more hostile to China than Trump was.
Right. My fear now is just that we have this way of thinking, and we can't change that way of thinking, that's dictating our foreign policy. So, like, John Mearsheimer might end up being right because he put that theory out there and everybody believes it and they adopt it, and
well, again,
and pushing
right,
for it.
I'm sure if they actually listened very carefully to what he said, he really does want to avoid war and believes that he can. But a lot of these people seem to be itching for some kind of war. And they don't have his wisdom. If he were in charge of the policy, he might be able to to drag this out and avoid war, avoid needless provocations. But he's not in charge of the policy. Instead, you have people like Marsha Blackburn, who who could very easily provoke a war.
Right. Something that I was just thinking about that really kind of pokes some holes in John Mearsheimer's theory about can allowing other regional hegemons to prosper and blossom militarily, is because we have the idea is you just don't want to have these military bases up against your border. We saw that with Ukraine. If China starts putting in bases in Mexico or in the Caribbean, obviously that's a problem, and there's this idea that we need to have space between these superpowers so we're not just butting heads against things, and that's a good idea. Having some space is good, and it's great for the countries that are in between that can sort of benefit from dealing with both countries, and it's going to actually be a very prosperous situation for countries that remain neutral between great powers. But we have Russia and China are both great powers, and they share one of the longest borders in the world. I don't know, maybe it is the largest border in the world between Russia and China. And then you also have India, which, we don't really talk about as a superpower, but it's a nuclear power. It now has, I think, surpassed China in population. It is growing. So I think you can say it's a superpower in its own right at this stage. And if not, it will be soon. And China and India had some tensions as well. I think a couple years ago, just on the Himalaya border, there's some clashes between Chinese and Indian troops where they actually really went medieval on each other. And I think they bludgeoned each other because they weren't allowed to carry guns. Right. So it was like a real
each
kind
other
of
with
medieval
sticks or 2x4s or something.
Sticks and rocks, and they killed people. Obviously there's some tensions between there, a little bit of clashes, but all three of these, Russia, China, India, they're all in the same region. They share borders with each other. And I think they're proving to the world what we're seeing now is relations between China and India are improving. They're all part of this BRICS. They're part of this multipolar world. They're sort of proving to the world that, hey, John, your theory is wrong. It's dead. Look, we are great superpowers, and we are right up against each other, and we can get along. We don't have to have this offensive realism where we have to make sure we contain you because you might take over us or whatever. So do you agree that that's kind of dispels his theory to some extent? Or
I don't know. I would I'm sure that he would have a very good answer for that. I don't know what it was. I can't say that I understand all the kind of ins and outs of his theory. I just don't have an answer.
Okay. Yeah. I was just listening to some videos of him. I haven't actually read his book, but I've heard a lot of John Mearsheimer. I feel like I understand it, but it's just this one thing that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
It doesn't make sense to me either. I mean, I think we just have to accept that China will be the regional hegemon, and I don't think there's any terrible consequence to that. I think that's an unreasonable fear. But he seems to think that if they can break out, from sort of like the Taiwan's the cork in the bottle, if the cork's removed, then the genie will come out and China will dominate the world. But I just don't see that. I really don't. I think unless we actually, disintegrate and plunge into warlordism or whatever in the U.S., we are going to continue to be dominant in North America and much of the Americas for the foreseeable future, for decades, if not centuries. That's a big chunk of the world,
No, yeah, that's plenty of space. We don't need it. I mean, it's great that we have two oceans.
Yeah, we already have
it's
that.
Really,
we don't need to be on the other side of the ocean trying to bottle up another power that's actually grown more powerful than we are. And I don't see the need. I just don't understand it.
Right. Well, I agree with you 100%. I don't want us to do that. I don't want us to try to contain China and put other countries down. I think we can really learn how to all prosper together, that this is not a zero-sum game. But do you believe that the U.S. will allow that to happen? Or do you think that the U.S. is going to do everything in its power to continue this containment policy of China? Because it seems to be quite popular within the United States.
Right. It does. Yeah. There's bipartisan support. There's no question about it. So I think there's every reason to believe that we will continue to pursue this containment policy and try to keep China down. I think there's no question that it's going to fail. Actually, like some of the efforts to cripple Chinese industry have already backfired, just like the sanctions in Europe against Russia backfired. But if it ever erupts into a military conflict, I think the consequences will be horrific for us. It will be humiliating.
It's so insane for me to even think that we contemplate this. It's just
I do.
You ever
too,
go to
but you have a
Walmart?
lot of right. There's a lot of people talking like it's just inevitable. Sometime in the next few years, there's going to be a war. Right. And you don't even hear that. There are a few people who talk like that about Russia, but in general, I think it's clear that, like the establishment, they're trying to use, obviously, Ukraine as a proxy to damage Russia. They're realizing that it's failing. They're starting to understand that, but they've never wanted to actually to fight Russia directly. I think that was a decision made a long time ago, and you see whenever like Zelensky starts to demand something that could very quickly lead to open conflict between NATO and Russia, the Pentagon steps up and says, no, we're not doing that. I think that's a very firm policy of theirs. But you do get noises from even the Pentagon talking about war with China. I don't understand it. I really don't.
Right. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. China could everything's made in China. Didn't you say that over 50% of U.S. military equipment comes from products sourced from China?
Yeah.
So even our own military is relying on the manufacturing power of China.
Such as it is, our feeble military industrial complex, such as it is.
Right, and it relies on Chinese components, Chinese parts. So it just the whole thing just seems insane to me. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised after everything talking to you for so long. Reality doesn't really matter to the United States foreign policy. It's just going to do what it's going to do. But I think it's so silly because I think people need to realize that the world benefits as China grows and prospers. We are the great benefactor of China's rise. Just look at all of our goods that we have here in the United States. Why we're able to get things so cheaply? We're beneficiaries of China's prosperity and growth.
Now, of course, Trump has would probably disagree with you on that. I mean, that again, he's been in favor of tariffs, and he's promised to impose some rather drastic tariffs. I think that's really beyond the scope of our podcast here, the whole issue of tariffs and protectionism. But there's another argument. Sure, of course, you get cheap goods, that it reduces inflation. It in so many ways it makes our lives materially better off. But then, what the protectionists would say is that you've completely wiped out, entire industries in the U.S. and made ourselves vulnerable. That's one thing. But then also, the entire communities are now just devastated, and we need to build those up again. And part of that is with some kind of protection, But again, I think that's really for another for maybe a whole other podcast or something. There's really an awful lot you could explore there. Just know that there's two sides to that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Well, let's maybe we can just pivot over a little bit and just kind of recap what's happening in the Middle East. So the big news story recently is that Benjamin Netanyahu has finally sacked Yoav Gallant. This is something we were hearing about months ago, that it was possible that he was going to do that because Gallant was kind of hesitant to go into Lebanon, but eventually did. So is this a significant move? Does this mean anything? What are your insights on the replacement of Yoav Gallant?
I think it is a significant move. Again, as in the U.S., I think that you find the realists are concentrated within the military in Israel. So the IDF is really much more of a realistic about their own capabilities, and they've been trying to apply the brakes to Netanyahu's plans. And Gallant, he's as a minister of defense and somebody he was a high-level commander. I don't know if he was a general or something, but anyway, he's high up in the IDF, so he's very much part of the IDF leadership. And so I think he was reflecting that realism. And that was one reason why he was very reluctant to go into Lebanon. Now, one thing is, on the whole moral question, I don't think there's any difference. Nobody's upset, unfortunately. Nobody of any significance is upset in Israel about the genocide. And that's just as true as the IDF. But they're more realistic. They understand their own limitations, and they did not want to open up a second front. So the loss of Gallant, if he replaced him with another IDF general, then I think we, maybe be in the same place we were before. But that's not what he did. He chose somebody, I believe, is Israel Katz, who is not IDF. I mean, he fought as a foot soldier some years ago, like most Israelis, probably involved in occupation, shooting rock throwing kids or something like that. But he is one of these fanatical, he's a fanatical adherent to the greater Israel vision. Maybe they all believe including the IDF, believes in the greater Israel, but they're just more realistic about how to bring it about. But he's one of these people that thinks, I believe, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu himself, that this is the time to do it, and let's no breaks, let's go all out, and bring the U.S. in. And so I think we can expect kind of an acceleration of Netanyahu's policies.
Okay, so you think that this will lead to more rapid escalation?
Yeah,
Israel.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was just like Gallant was always maybe a voice of caution, and that voice has been silenced. Now you have another hothead in there, so it's only going to be even all the more reckless.
You have any idea of what type of reckless behavior we might expect? I mean, we've talked about blowing up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, try to rebuild the Temple Mount. There's talks about preemptive strikes on Iran. That's got to be a growing popular sentiment within Israel, because Iran has promised a severe retaliation to the latest attack, and I think a lot of people in Israel are like, well, why are we sitting around waiting for this? Mm-hmm. Let's hit them first. Do you think that's a possibility? I mean,
sure.
It's a possibility.
Yeah, I don't know I think everything you listed is a possibility. I just have no idea which option they're going to exercise first.
I want answers, Dad.
Sorry. Again, it's just like it's very difficult to predict the behavior of crazy people, and that's what we're talking about. It's just, other than clearly they want to realize their dream of a greater Israel.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything else that you think we should cover with regards to the Middle East? I feel like just the big thing is just waiting for this Iran retaliation, but we haven't really talked Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon. If there are any big updates that you'd like to give.
I don't have any updates, no.
Okay. Well, then I think we can end it a little bit earlier today.
Sure.
Stop there.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day, Dan.
Okay, you too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.